Greetings, everybody. This is Dr. Jonathan Cox here with your weekly lecture. This week, we are looking at hate speech and racial rhetoric. This has obvious implications for social media, particularly because of the ability to easily share, as well as the ability for people to become anonymous. Now, in order to look at hate speech with regards to social media, we must first understand what hate speech is. Let's start by watching a brief clip of a report from the Reason Foundation, where they spoke with students from the University of Southern California.
If somebody uses a racial slur.
That's hate speech? Yeah.
I think that would be a reason to, like a crime.
What if somebody says Muslims shouldn't be allowed into the US?
Yeah, that's hate speech.
What if somebody denies the Holocaust?
I don't have any understanding for that. You shouldn't be able to blatantly lie about something, especially like the Holocaust.
A female comedian says men are scum.
I don't believe that's hate speech.
All white people are racist.
No. I would say no.
I don't know.
As you can see, there is often confusion as to what constitutes hate speech. According to conventional definitions, hate speech is any speech or expression that attacks a person or social group on the basis of attributes such as race or ethnic origin, religion, national origin, sex or gender identity, disability, or sexual orientation. The laws of many countries also include gestures, conduct, writing, or displays that incite violence or prejudicial actions against others on the basis of their group memberships. Interestingly, the US actually doesn't have any laws against hate speech, since US courts consistently rule that any laws criminalizing hate speech violate guaranteed First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. Several categories of speech are not protected by the First Amendment, however, such as speech that calls for violence against others, and many people believe that hate speech constitutes such calls for violence. Let's go back to the interviews with students from the Reason Foundation. In this clip, you will also see students discussing the possibility of regulating hate speech in the United States.
One common refrain on campus is that hateful speech is actually equivalent to violence.
Do you think hate speech by itself is an act of violence?
I do.
Yes.
You know?
Your words can't physically harm someone.
I think violence is more than physical. It's emotional, psychological.
If hate speech is violence, maybe it makes sense to regulate it like Canada, Australia, and most of Europe do. Many of the students we spoke to seemed open to the idea.
I think if people could understand the power of words, then maybe hate speech as violence could help us have restrictions that are not damaging or that could stop at a certain place.
Those kind of opinions are better left unsaid because it just incites violence and hatred among everyone, you know.
Are you in favor of regulations that would stop people from doing that or that would make that a crime?
Yeah.
I would have no problem if it is regulated.
But then who determines what constitutes hate speech? While most respondents to a recent poll agreed that hate speech is immoral, 82% said it would be difficult to ban because people can't agree on what is hateful.
Could people form a consensus around whether these things are hate speech?
Definitely not.
I think it would be really hard to agree.
And so does that give you pause and, make you think like maybe the regulation would not do what I would hope it would do?
Yeah.
Advocates of hate speech laws often say that racists cloak themselves in the veil of free speech to attack vulnerable populations.
Having free speech is a great right for everyone, but when the more powerful have it, it's going to obviously work to their advantage more than the less powerful.
As you just heard, many people believe that free speech laws provide a way for racists to attack racially and ethnically marginalized populations under the guise of free speech, and that individuals with more power than others are better able to use such laws to their advantage. So then, what are the implications of not having laws against hate speech? Should hate speech be banned, particularly on social media? Let's take a listen to what Nadine Strossen, former president of the ACLU, has to say.
Social media have been called upon to censor hate speech, and they've tried to do so, but with no more success than any other attempt at censoring hate speech by governments throughout history and around the world. I understand the moral satisfaction of calling for suppressing ideas that we hate, but experience shows that censorship does more harm than good. Countries around the world, including comparable democratic countries in Europe, Canada, Australia, and so forth, have been censoring hate speech for several decades. They have not been effective, most ironically being used to suppress the rights of marginalized individuals and groups. And not surprisingly, a very large coalition of civil liberties and civil rights organizations have been complaining to Facebook for years that it has punished as hate speech their advocacy of equality. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement on behalf of the pipeline protesters. Anybody who is objecting to government policies is disproportionately censored as engaging in hate speech. A more effective response to any idea we hate or consider hateful or dangerous is not to silence it, but to refute it, to explain why. A compassionate approach is much more effective than an angry, hostile, demonizing approach. Social media make it much easier to deploy hate speech, but counter speech is also more easily disseminated.
While Strossen makes some compelling points, it's also important to recognize that hate speech can have very real impacts on racial and ethnic minorities. For instance, research has shown that pervasive exposure to racism and discrimination has significant negative psychological and physiological effects on African Americans. Additionally, hate speech is often part of the ideological beliefs that individuals use as justification for enacting physical violence against others. Take, for example, James Fields, the 21-year-old white supremacist who plowed his car into a group of counter-protesters during the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. He critically injured many and he even killed one woman, Heather Heyer. Before we wrap up this lecture, let's watch one final clip from the Reason Foundation.
Hateful speech might be hurtful, stupid, or just plain wrong, but if we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to hear it, we also lose the opportunity to rebut it, and the person who's willing to speak forbidden words gains a special power. When Austria imprisoned historian David Irving for Holocaust denial, he was greeted with a hero's welcome by a crowd of 10,000 in Budapest shortly after his release. The government had turned him into a martyr. In America, attempts to shut down or shout down speakers have almost certainly backfired as well, by boosting the visibility of provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Trump saying any of these things should definitely be regulated because he has so much influence in him saying these in speeches and stuff.
Trump saying things about minorities like Hispanics and women and Muslims.
Does it concern you that if the government is the one that's regulating these things, that people like Trump would be the one deciding what is protected speech and what is not?
Yeah, of course, that's another concern.
So there you have it, some information about hate speech, the implications for social media, and the ongoing debate about whether or not to regulate hate speech. Now, whether or not you think hate speech should be banned, what's important right now is that you understand how it works, who it impacts, and that you can recognize it when you see it, whether that's on social media or elsewhere. That's it for today's lecture. Have a great day and peace.